The art gallery was deliberately cold, soaring white walls, marble floors polished to a mirror shine where I could see my own distorted reflection. The lighting was professionally arranged, illuminating twisted metal sculptures and abstract paintings that to my eye looked like expensive spills. The clinking of champagne flutes, the dispassionate pulse of electronic jazz, the low hum of insincere conversations. This was the world my son Julian had chosen, or rather, the world his wife Chloe had chosen for him. From a corner of the room, I observed the stage. I had financed this entire circus, from the pristine walls to the vintage wine they were sipping. I had bought my son a stage, but it seemed he had happily ceded the starring role to someone else. There she was, Chloe, the center of all attention. She wore a silk emerald green dress that clung to her body, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. Her smile, one practiced 1,000 times in the mirror, never wavered. Julian stood beside her, handsome in a tailored Italian suit, but his eyes constantly unconsciously sought Chloe's approval after every sentence. He was like a supporting actor there, only to make the leading lady shine brighter. A dry thought echoed in my mind. I invested in a racehorse but forgot to check the jockey. I decided it was time to make my entrance. I moved toward them, slowly, deliberately parting the crowd with my presence. A few investors men I'd done business with in the past gave me respectful nods. They knew who I was. Evelyn Grant was not just Julian's mother. She was a name that had once made markets tremble. I arrived just as a young reporter from a local business journal was pointing a microphone at my son. "Julian, this success is so impressive," the reporter gushed. "Do you have any words for your mother, your very first angel investor?" I saw Julian stiffen slightly. He shot a quick glance at Chloe, a look that lasted only half a second but told me everything: hesitation, fear. "Oh, of course," he stammered. I am very grateful for my mother's support." A weak, lifeless answer. But Chloe was neither. She quickly interjected, placing a proprietary hand on Julian's arm and smiling at the reporter. "Julian is being modest," she said, her voice smooth as honey. "The truth is, his talent was bound to flourish. He just needed the chance to prove himself." A clever turn of phrase, simultaneously diminishing my role while elevating Julian's image. But she wasn't finished. The reporter, perhaps sensing the tension, tried to salvage the moment by turning to me. "Mrs. Grant, you must be so proud of your son. What gift are you giving him to celebrate this success?" It was a baited question, an opportunity for me to offer some bland, congratulatory words. But Chloe seized it. She didn't answer right away. She intentionally created a dramatic pause long enough for those nearby to quiet down and lean in. Her eyes locked onto mine, but I knew her words weren't for me. They were for the crowd, for the camera, for the world. "Oh," she began, her voice still sweet, but now laced with a sharp, cold edge. "The greatest gift Evelyn could give us now is her complete trust and to step back, allowing Julian the freedom to soar without any burdens." The air grew thick. Burdens. The word was carefully chosen, perfectly delivered. In front of everyone, she had just painted me as a controlling geriatric mother, holding back her son's career. She had turned my investment into a chain, their desire for independence into an act of bravery. The young reporter was speechless, her mouth slightly agape. I heard a few whispers ripple through the crowd. A public slap in the face, leaving no visible mark but hurting more than any physical blow. Julian looked down at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. Chloe, however, maintained her triumphant smile, waiting for my reaction. She was expecting anger, hurt, perhaps even tears. That would be the final confirmation that the story she had just spun was true, but she received none of it. My expression did not change. A cold stillness settled over me. I smiled, a slight upturn of my lips that did not reach my eyes. I took a single step forward, not toward Chloe, but toward Julian. I patted his shoulder, a gesture filled with a quiet pity, but my eyes were fixed on Chloe, piercing through her perfect facade. "Thank you for publicly clarifying the terms, Chloe," I said, my voice calm, but every word was sharpened like a razor. "It saves a great deal of time. Then I turned my back. I walked away, not quickly, not slowly, my posture ramrod straight. Each step on the marble floor echoed with finality. I could feel dozens of eyes on my back. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea before Moses. No one dared to meet my gaze. I walked straight out the door without a backward glance. The journey to the parking garage felt endless. Once inside the quiet luxury of my car, I didn't rush to start the engine. I took a single deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. There were no tears, no trembling hands, only a terrifying clarity. They have made a fatal mistake, I told myself. They thought this was an emotional battle where tears and hurtful words were the weapons. But they have unwittingly dragged the fight onto my territory, a strategic chessboard. And on this board, I was already 10 moves ahead of them. I took out my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. I opened my contacts, found the single name I needed, Mr. Chen-esque. I didn't call. I typed a short, emotionless message. Initiate protocol storm. When betrayed, some people break. Others, having prepared for it, become more dangerous than ever. Which are you? My home is nothing like that art gallery. Where that space was cold and public, my library is warm and private. It is my sanctuary, my fortress, my mind given physical form. The walls are lined not with sterile white paint, but with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves filled with books, first editions, leather-bound classics, treatises on economic theory and military strategy. The air smells of old paper and cedar. This room is the heart of my home, the true seat of my power, the place where fortunes were made and empires were built long before Julian's little venture was ever conceived. It was here in this very room that the seeds of his downfall were sown. I walked to the far end of the library to a large oil painting of a stormy sea, a gift from my late husband, Robert. He always said it reminded him of me calm on the surface, but with a formidable power churning beneath. My fingers found a small hidden latch along the frame, and the painting swung inwards, revealing the cold gray steel of a vault. Inside, among stock certificates and property deeds, was a single navy blue leather portfolio embossed with gold letters, Project J Creative. Human memory is a notoriously unreliable thing, especially where money is concerned. People remember the amounts they receive with perfect clarity, but they conveniently forget the conditions attached. I have always believed in the clarifying power of the written word. As I placed the portfolio on my large oak desk, my mind drifted back 3 years to a scene that had played out in this very room. Julian and Chloe sat in the same leather armchairs that faced my desk, now their faces glowing with an almost childlike excitement. They had just pitched me their business idea, a high-end artisanal home goods brand. The idea itself was mediocre, but Julian's passion was palpable, and Chloe's ambition was a force of nature. I knew they would be a potent combination. Your vision is ambitious, I had told them, choosing my words carefully. And ambition requires significant capital. I am happy to provide the seed funding for your dream, Julian. Oh, Mom, thank you, Julian had exclaimed, his relief evident. Chloe's smile was even brighter. We knew you'd believe in us, Evelyn, she'd said already, seeing the future boutiques and magazine spreads. However, I continued my tone gentle but firm. This is a substantial amount of money. My lawyers insist that we have the proper paperwork in place. It's mostly a formality for my estate planning. I gestured to a stack of documents Mr. Chen had prepared. It's called a convertible note, a standard instrument for investments of this nature. In essence, it's a loan, but it gives me the option to convert that loan into company shares in the future, just to protect my investment. There are also a few standard clauses to protect the investor. You shouldn't worry about the details. I watched them closely. Their eyes glazed over at the mention of legal terms. All they heard was loan and formality. Their minds were already spending the money. Julian, ever trusting, picked up the pen immediately. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, was already calculating their profit margins. They signed page after page without reading a single sentence, their signatures looping with aspirational flair. They believed they were accepting a gift. I knew they were signing a leash. Back in the present, I slid my reading glasses onto my nose and opened the portfolio. The signed agreement was pristine. It's a Trojan horse, the convertible note, a classic tool in the world of venture capital. It enters the gates of a new company looking like a gift, a gesture of support. But inside, it carries an army of legal clauses ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. My finger traced down the pages past the dense legal jargon until it landed on the one clause that mattered, Clause 4B. I had insisted Mr. Chen make the language airtight. I read the words aloud to the silent room, savoring each one. In the event that the borrower, Julian Grant and Chloe Grant, or the company J Creative LLC, engages in any action, public or private, which can be reasonably construed as detrimental to the investors, Evelyn Grant. Personal reputation or financial interests, the investor shall have the immediate and irrevocable right to trigger the conversion option. I paused, then continued to the payload. The conversion shall be executed at a majority stake of 51% of all company shares based on the principal loan amount plus accrued interest. A slow smile spread across my face. Chloe thought her carefully chosen words at the party were a dagger to my heart, a public severing of familial ties. She thought she was cutting the puppet strings. The poor foolish girl had no idea that with her own words, her branding of me as a burden, she had just handed me the master key to their entire kingdom. She had personally fulfilled the conditions of Clause 4B. This was never about being a supportive mother. It was always about being a smart investor. And the first rule of smart investing is to always plan for the exit. I took out my phone and captured a clear image of Clause 4B. I sent it to Mr. Chen. My message was brief. Prepare the documentation. His reply came less than a minute later. Understood. Phase 2 is ready. Protocol Storm has stages, I thought, closing the portfolio and placing it back in its secure vault. Phase 1 provocation and confirmation of betrayal was completed last night. Now begins Phase 2, cutting off the supply lines. In business and in life, do you believe in unconditional trust or in the unassailable truth of terms written in black and white? Tell me what you think. Protocol Storm was not designed to be a blunt instrument. It is a symphony of calculated moves, each with its own timing and purpose. Phase 2, cutting off the supply lines, was meant to be a slow bleed, a gradual tightening of the financial noose. But an attack, I have always believed, can come from an unexpected quarter, and an astute general must be prepared to alter their strategy in response to new intelligence. That new intelligence arrived the following morning, not through a lawyer or a private investigator, but through a video call from a number I had come to know well over the past 6 months. The face that appeared on my screen was weathered and tired, framed by gray hair and etched with the deep lines of a man who had worked hard his entire life. This was David Chen, and he was Chloe's father. David and I were not friends. We were allies bound not by affection but by a shared, unfortunate reality. We both understood the true nature of his daughter. He was a self-made man who had built a successful construction business from nothing. He valued hard work, integrity, and humility, qualities his daughter viewed with contempt. He had contacted me shortly after the engagement, a difficult call I could tell he was loath to make. I know this is unorthodox, Mrs. Grant, he had said, then his voice heavy. But I feel a moral obligation to warn you. My daughter, she sees people as rungs on a ladder. Be careful. Since then, he had become my silent, reluctant informant. He still had contacts within the world Chloe so desperately wanted to conquer, and he would occasionally pass along whispers and warnings. He did it, I think, not to harm his daughter, but as a form of penance for having raised her. Evelyn, he said this morning, foregoing any pleasantries. They're making a move, a stupid one. I leaned forward, my full attention on the screen. Go on, David. My contact at Sterling Bank called me. Chloe and Julian were there yesterday afternoon. They've applied for a second mortgage on the house, a substantial one, $200,000. I remained silent, processing. The house in question was the one I had helped them buy, the one where my name was still on the deed as a 35% co-owner. Taking out a second mortgage would require my signature. They can't do that without my consent. I stated more to confirm the facts than to question them. David let out a grim chuckle. That's the stupid part. They told the bank you had already signed. They presented a power of attorney document giving Chloe full authority to sign on your behalf. Forgery. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. They weren't just being disrespectful anymore. They were committing a felony. This was a desperate, reckless move, a sign that they were living far beyond their means and needed a quick infusion of cash. The glamorous party, the expensive clothes, the carefully curated image, it was all a house of cards, and they were trying to pull equity from my asset to keep it from collapsing. The bank is doing its due diligence, David continued. They're sending the paperwork to your official address for verification. It should arrive in a day or two. But I thought you should know now. I thought you should be prepared. I am more than prepared, David, I said, a cold resolve settling over me. Thank you for the information. As always, your integrity is appreciated. We ended the call. The game had changed. My initial plan was to let them feel the financial pressure mount, to watch them squirm as their suppliers' calls went unanswered. I would let them exhaust their options before revealing my trump card with the convertible note. But this was an escalation I hadn't predicted. They had taken a private corporate battle and dragged it into the realm of criminal fraud. They were no longer just arrogant and ungrateful. They were dangerous. My mind raced, recalibrating the strategy for Protocol Storm. The slow bleed was no longer sufficient. What was needed now was a surgical, preemptive strike. I picked up my phone not to text, but to call Mr. Chen directly. Mr. Chen, I said the moment he answered. Change of plans. We're accelerating Phase 3. Phase 3. I could hear the surprise in his voice. But Evelyn, we haven't even fully executed Phase 2. New intelligence dictates a new timeline. I explained calmly, relaying the information from David. They've attempted to commit fraud. This gives us leverage we cannot afford to waste. I could hear the clicking of his keyboard as he processed the implications. My God, he murmured. They're amateurs. They're fools, I corrected. And their foolishness is our opportunity. I want you to do 2 things immediately. First, file an emergency injunction with the court to freeze any and all financial activity related to the property at 123 Maple Drive. Cite attempted fraud and forgery. I want that house locked down so tightly they can't even get a credit line against the garden gnome. Consider it done, he said, his voice now sharp and focused. Second, I continued, the convertible note. Forget about waiting. I want the conversion notice drafted and delivered by courier tomorrow morning to their office in the middle of the workday. I want Julian to receive the news that he is no longer the majority owner of his own company in front of his entire staff. This was no longer just about taking back control. It was about making a statement. It was about demonstrating the consequences of underestimating your opponent. Chloe wanted me to step back. I would do more than that. I would step on their necks. You thought the greatest gift was my disappearance. I thought, looking out my library window at the calm, orderly garden. You're about to learn that my presence is the only thing that was keeping your world from burning down. Do you believe an enemy's desperate mistake is the best opportunity to strike, or is it better to stick to a long-term plan? The next morning, I did not wake with the nervous energy of a general on the eve of battle. I woke with the calm of a mathematician who's already solved the equation and is merely waiting for the proof to be demonstrated. I went through my morning routine with precision. I read the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, my eyes scanning the global markets, my mind 1,000 miles away from the petty drama about to unfold. I drank my Darjeeling tea, strong and without sugar, as the sun cast long, clean shadows across my library. There is a profound power in routine, a quiet declaration that your own world remains orderly, even as you are about to unleash chaos upon another's. At precisely 9:05 a.m., my phone chimed with a text message from Mr. Chen. It was as elegant and efficient as the man himself. Injunction filed and granted by the night court judge. Courier is en route. ETA 10:30 a.m. I took a slow sip of my tea. The difference between amateurs and professionals is not in the planning of an attack, but in their emotional response to its execution. Amateurs feel anger, then glee. They act out of passion. Professionals feel nothing at all. They act out of necessity. Julian and Chloe had made this necessary. Their attempt at fraud was not just an insult, it was a sloppy emotional move that exposed a critical weakness. And in my world, you do not ignore an exposed flank. You exploit it swiftly and without mercy. Meanwhile, across town, the offices of J Creative were basking in the afterglow of their successful launch party. The atmosphere was electric, a heady mix of self-congratulation and caffeine. Employees buzzed around the open-plan workspace, a trendy loft with exposed brick and far too many fiddle-leaf figs. They were recapping the highlights of the party name, dropping the local influencers who had attended, blissfully unaware that the company they were celebrating was at that very moment a dead man walking. Chloe moved through the office like a queen surveying her court. She had traded her emerald silk for a crisp white power suit, her laughter just a little too loud, her pats on employees' shoulders just a little too condescending. She stopped by the desk of a young graphic designer. "Did you see the piece in Modern Living online?" Chloe asked, not waiting for an answer. "They called our aesthetic a triumph of minimalist luxury. Evelyn could never have understood that. Her taste is so dated." Inside his glass-walled office, Julian was trying to project the image of a focused CEO. He was on the phone, pacing, one hand running through his hair. But his stress was not the creative pressure of a burgeoning artist. It was the frantic anxiety of a man juggling overdue invoices. The party had been a success, but a costly one. Vendors were calling. The credit cards were maxed out. He was counting on the second mortgage from the bank to be his lifeline. He had no idea I had already cut it. At exactly 10:29 a.m., the front door of the office opened. A man in a sharp gray uniform bearing the logo of a high-end legal courier service stepped inside. His presence was an immediate anomaly in the casual creative environment. He held a large, rigid legal envelope. "I have a package for Mr. Julian Grant." The courier announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. "It must be signed for in person." The receptionist, a young woman with pink hair, looked flustered. "I can sign for it. He's in a meeting." "My instructions are explicit," the courier replied, unmoved. "Mr. Grant in person." The exchange had drawn attention. The office grew quiet. Julian, annoyed by the interruption, emerged from his office. "What is all this?" he asked, his impatience clear. He signed the electronic pad with a flourish and took the envelope. He tore it open with a hint of irritation, assuming it was some tedious contract or permit. I can picture the scene perfectly, the thick, creamy paper of the letterhead from Chen Tran and Associates, a law firm whose name alone commanded respect and fear. His brow would have furrowed in confusion, which would have slowly melted into disbelief as he began to read. His face, I imagined, drained of all color. His hand, the one holding the document, would have begun to tremble. He would have scanned the dense text, but certain phrases would have leaped out at him, each one a nail in his professional coffin. Pursuant to the terms of the convertible note dated May 14, 2022. Breach of Clause 4B actions detrimental to the investor's reputation. Hereby provides formal notice of the immediate and irrevocable execution of the conversion option. Transferring a majority stake of 51% of all company shares to Evelyn Grant. Chloe, noticing his catatonic state, sauntered over. "What is it, darling? Did they send you a trophy?" she asked with a playful smirk. Unable to form words, Julian simply handed her the documents. I can see her snatching them impatiently, her eyes scanning the page. I can see the smirk falter, the mask of smug superiority cracking to reveal the raw panic beneath. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "This is a joke. She can't do this. This is illegal." And at that precise moment, as the reality of their corporate decapitation was sinking in, the second blow landed. Julian's CFO, a nervous man named Arthur, burst into the office, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "Julian," he gasped, "the bank just called. All our accounts have been frozen. The corporate credit lines, the operating capital. Everything. They received an emergency court injunction related to your house. Something about attempted fraud. What the hell is going on?" The two strikes landed less than 60 seconds apart. In 1 minute, they had lost control of their company. In the next, they had lost access to every penny they had. The lifeline Julian was counting on had been transformed into a hangman's noose. The entire office was now silent, every employee watching the horrifying drama play out in the glass-walled office. The triumph of minimalist luxury had just been replaced by the spectacle of absolute ruin. Back in my library, my phone chimed again. A second text from Mr. Chen. "Both packages delivered." I took another sip of my tea. The market was up 3 points. It was going to be a good day. Is a swift, overwhelming strike more effective than a slow, drawn-out campaign? Share your strategic preference. The aftermath of a blitzkrieg is not a celebration. It is a deafening silence filled with the smoke of ruin. The glass-walled office at J Creative had become a fishbowl of despair. Employees stood frozen at their desks, pretending to work, but actually stealing glances, whispering into their chat applications, their loyalty to the brand evaporating with every passing second. Inside the fishbowl, Chloe and Julian were trapped in the wreckage of their own ambition. The initial shock had given way to a bitter, toxic fallout. "This is your fault." Chloe shrieked, her voice stripped of its polished charm, now raw and ugly. She threw a stack of papers at Julian. "I told you she was a snake. I told you to handle her, to cut her off, but you were too weak." "My fault," Julian yelled back, his face a mask of desperation. "You were the one who provoked her in public, a burden." "Chloe, was that really necessary? You poked the dragon and now you're surprised we got burned." Their argument was a predictable, pathetic spiral of blame. It was the sound of two parasites turning on each other now that the host had been removed. I had no need to witness it, but I could picture it perfectly. I had seen it a dozen times in boardrooms after hostile takeovers. The weak always look for someone else to blame for their own inadequacies. Eventually, Julian did the one thing he always did when cornered. He called his mother. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. I let it ring twice before answering, not with the warmth of a mother, but with the clipped efficiency of a new majority shareholder. Evelyn Grant. Mom, what have you done?" His voice was broken, a boy's voice, not a man's. "You've destroyed everything. The company, the accounts. Everything's gone." "I haven't destroyed anything, Julian." I replied, my tone level and devoid of emotion. "I have protected my investment from mismanagement and fraud. What you are experiencing are not my actions, but the consequences of your own. If you have specific questions regarding corporate operations, please direct them to Mr. Chen. He will be acting as the interim chairman. We will not be speaking about this directly again." I hung up before he could respond. That, I knew, would be the most painful blow of all. Not the loss of the company, not the loss of the money, but the severing of the final emotional cord. He could no longer appeal to me as a son. From now on, he would have to deal with me as his boss. The silence that followed this final decisive click must have been terrifying for them. It was the silence of a closed door, a locked safe, a future they no longer controlled. And in that silence, Chloe's desperate narcissistic mind began to concoct its next move. If she couldn't win on the battlefield of finance and law, a world she didn't understand, she would drag the war into the mud. She would attack the one thing she thought was vulnerable, my identity as a person. She would try to paint me not as a competent strategist, but as a senile, vindictive old woman. 2 days later, I was in my library not reading, but playing a game of chess against myself. It's an exercise I find clarifying, forcing you to anticipate not just your opponent's best move, but your own. I was contemplating a queen's gambit when the doorbell rang. My housekeeper Maria answered it. A moment later, she appeared at the library door, her expression troubled. "Ma'am, there are 2 people here to see you," she said quietly. "They say they're from the Department of Adult Protective Services." I felt a flicker not of surprise but of satisfaction. Predictable, I thought. I placed my queen back on her starting square. "Thank you, Maria. Please show them in, and bring Mr. Chen another coffee, would you?" I rose as the 2 caseworkers entered the room. They were professionals, a man and a woman in their 40s, dressed in sensible, unassuming clothes. Their faces were neutral, trained to show no judgment. But I saw a flash of surprise in their eyes when they saw me lucid, well-dressed, in a home that was the epitome of order. And then another when they saw Mr. Chen sitting calmly in a leather armchair, a briefcase resting at his feet. This was not the scene of elder neglect they had been led to expect. "Mrs. Grant," the woman asked, "I'm Sarah Jenkins, and this is my colleague, Mark Calloway. We received an anonymous report expressing concern for your welfare." "Concern?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Please do sit down. Tell me more." They sat on the edge of the sofa, looking slightly uncomfortable. The report alleged, Mr. Calloway began consulting his notepad, that you might be experiencing some cognitive decline, that you were being isolated, and that there was a possibility of financial exploitation by your family. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Mr. Chen gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. "I see," I said, my voice calm. "An anonymous report, how very brave of the person who filed it." I looked from Ms. Jenkins to Mr. Calloway. "Before we continue, I believe my lawyer, Mr. Chen, has something that might clarify the situation." Mr. Chen leaned forward and opened his briefcase. He did not present a chaotic jumble of papers. He presented a slim, perfectly organized portfolio. "Ms. Jenkins, Mr. Calloway." He began his voice the epitome of professional courtesy. "We anticipated this tactic. As such, we prepared a brief for you." He handed them each a copy. "On page 1, he continued, you will find the results of a full neuropsychological evaluation performed on Mrs. Grant 3 weeks ago at the request of her estate planners. As you can see, the conclusion from the chief of neurology at University Hospital is that Mrs. Grant's cognitive functions are in the 98th percentile for her age group." The caseworker's eyes widened as they read. "On page 2, Mr. Chen went on, his voice hardening slightly, you will find a transcript of a formal notice of corporate takeover, which was served to Mr. Julian Grant 2 days ago, detailing the legal and contractual basis for the action. It was necessitated by a series of reckless financial decisions on his part." He paused, letting them absorb the information. "And on page 3, you will find evidence submitted to the district court yesterday morning regarding an attempt by Mr. Julian Grant and Ms. Chloe Grant to secure a fraudulent second mortgage on a property co-owned by Mrs. Grant using a forged power of attorney." A heavy silence filled the room. The 2 caseworkers looked up from the documents, their expressions transformed from professional neutrality to dawning comprehension. They were not here on a mission of mercy. They had been deployed as a weapon. Filing a false report with a government agency like yours is a criminal offense. Mr. Chen stated, his voice now like ice. "It is a desperate, malicious act designed to harass and intimidate. This is no longer a simple welfare check. You have unfortunately become witnesses in an ongoing legal battle. We have already drafted a criminal complaint against the anonymous reporters whom we can very easily identify. We will be filing it this afternoon." The professional masks of the caseworkers were now fully gone. They understood. They had been used as pawns in a war they knew nothing about. Ms. Jenkins cleared her throat. "Thank you for this information, Mr. Chen, Mrs. Grant. It is illuminating. We will include this in our official report. Our case here is clearly closed." They stood up, eager to leave. I walked them to the door myself. "I appreciate you doing your job," I told them, my voice sincere. It must be difficult dealing with families. You have no idea, ma'am, Mr. Calloway murmured before they quickly departed. I closed the door and turned back to my library. The chessboard was waiting. Chloe had tried to knock over the whole board. Instead, she had just lost her queen. When an opponent resorts to dirty tricks, do you believe in retaliating in kind or in using the elegance of the criminal complaint was filed the next afternoon. It was not a headline-grabbing lawsuit, but a quiet, methodical report submitted to the district attorney's office, complete with the sworn testimony of the 2 Adult Protective Services caseworkers. It was a time bomb ticking silently whose detonation I now fully controlled. With their desperate, foolish attack, Chloe and Julian had not only failed to harm me, but they had handed me the final piece of leverage I needed, the threat of a criminal record. For a week, I let them marinate in that terror. I allowed the silence to stretch to become a suffocating presence in their lives. I knew the injunction had frozen their assets, the takeover notice had crippled their authority, and now the looming criminal charge threatened their very liberty. They were trapped, and every door they tried was locked. Their frantic calls to lawyers would have been met with grim assessments and exorbitant retainer fees they could no longer afford. Their world had shrunk to the size of their panic. Finally, when I judged that their arrogance had been sufficiently tenderized by fear, I had Mr. Chen send them a summons. It was not a request. It was a formal notification to attend a meeting at his office to discuss a potential resolution to all pending legal matters. It was the single ray of hope in their dark tunnel, a lifeline they had no choice but to grasp. The law offices of Chen Tran and Associates were designed to communicate one thing: quiet, unshakable power. The reception area was a symphony of gray marble, polished steel, and dark wood. The air was cool and smelled faintly of old leather and expensive ink. When Chloe and Julian were shown into the main conference room, I was already there, seated at the head of a long, imposing mahogany table. Mr. Chen sat to my right. We did not rise to greet them. They looked diminished in this environment. Julian's suit, once a symbol of his ambition, now seemed too big for him. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Chloe, for the first time since I'd known her, was not wearing a statement piece of jewelry. She was dressed in a simple black dress, her face pale and stripped of its usual defiant smirk. They looked like what they were, defendants. They took the seats opposite us, the vast expanse of polished wood between us feeling like a chasm. Julian broke the silence, his voice cracking. "Mom, Evelyn, I am so sorry. We were wrong. Chloe was... We were under a lot of pressure. The APS call was a terrible mistake. Please tell us what we need to do to fix this. We'll do anything." It was a pathetic, predictable plea, an appeal to a maternal instinct he had long since forfeited the right to evoke. I did not respond. I simply nodded to Mr. Chen. "Thank you for coming." Mr. Chen began, his voice flat and impersonal. He opened a single slim file in front of him. "My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, are under the impression that this meeting is to negotiate the terms of the criminal complaint and the injunction on their property." He paused, letting the unspoken hope hang in the air for a moment before snatching it away. "That is a secondary issue. We are here today to finalize the corporate restructuring of J Creative." Confusion flickered across Julian's face. "Restructuring? But the company is frozen. We can't do anything." "That is incorrect," Mr. Chen said. "The company is not frozen. It is simply under new management." He slid a familiar document across the table. It was the original convertible note they had signed 3 years ago. "As you know, you were served a notice of conversion last week." "Our lawyer said that could be contested," Chloe interjected, a spark of her old fire returning. "He said it was an aggressive interpretation of the clause." Mr. Chen met her gaze without blinking. "Then you have received poor counsel. The clause is iron-clad, and your actions provided a textbook definition of a breach. The public statement at the launch party was a clear attempt to damage Mrs. Grant's reputation. The fraudulent mortgage application was an attack on her assets, and the false report to a government agency was a malicious act that falls squarely under the definition of detrimental conduct." He slid a second, much thicker document across the table. The conversion notice was not an offer. It was not the beginning of a negotiation. It was a statement of an action already completed. This, he said, tapping the binder, is the newly filed corporate charter for J Creative LLC. As of 10:30 a.m. last Tuesday, my client Evelyn Grant is the legally registered majority shareholder with a controlling interest of 51%. This was the checkmate. This was the moment the king falls. It was not a loud, dramatic explosion, but a quiet, final click of a lock. Julian stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. Chloe's face was a blank canvas of shock. Her mind, for once, had no witty retort, no manipulative angle to play. She'd run out of moves. It was only then that I spoke, my voice calm and measured, not as a mother, but as the new chairwoman of the board. "The restructuring is quite simple, really," I said, looking directly at Julian. "J Creative will continue to operate. However, there will be some changes. Mr. Chen will serve as the interim chairman to oversee a full financial audit." I let my gaze drift to Chloe. "Non-essential personnel and consultants whose contracts are not beneficial to the company's bottom line will be terminated effective immediately. You, Chloe, fall into that category. Your consulting agreement is void. You are no longer affiliated with the company in any capacity." Finally, I looked back at my son. "You, Julian, may remain in your position as creative director. However, your salary will be adjusted to reflect market rates for a company of this size, and you will report to a new CEO who will be appointed by the board, which is to say by me, within the next 30 days. Your performance will be subject to a strict quarterly review." I leaned back in my chair. This is not a negotiation. This is the new reality. Your cooperation in this smooth transition will be noted. The implication was clear. The criminal complaint was the sword hanging over their heads. As long as they complied, it would remain in its sheath. Julian slumped in his chair, a hollowed-out man. He simply nodded, unable to speak. All the fight had gone out of him. Chloe was white with a silent, impotent fury. She had tried to erase me, to make me disappear. Instead, I had become her husband's boss, the sole arbiter of their financial future, the architect of her humiliation. I had not disappeared. I had become ubiquitous. I was the air they now had to breathe. "The meeting is over," I said, rising from my chair. Mr. Chen closed his file. We turned and left them there, sitting in the cold, silent monument to their own defeat. Is true victory the complete annihilation of your enemy, or is it taking control of their world and forcing them to live by your rules? A transfer of power is never a clean single event. It is a slow, often brutal unraveling of the old regime. The days following the meeting at Mr. Chen's office were a masterclass in this process. I did not need to be physically present at J Creative to assert my authority. The structures I put in place did the work for me. The first thread to be pulled was Chloe. On Monday morning, she arrived at the office perhaps out of habit or a last flicker of defiance, only to find her access card had been deactivated. The head of security, a man I had personally vetted and hired, met her at the lobby. He was polite but firm, informing her that her consultancy had been terminated and that she had 30 minutes to collect her personal belongings under his supervision. The humiliation was a public spectacle exactly as I intended. Employees watched from behind their monitors as Chloe, the self-proclaimed queen of J Creative, was escorted to her former office. She emerged a short while later, not with designer bags, but with a single sad cardboard box containing a few picture frames and a wilting orchid. As she walked through the office, the silence was absolute. No one offered a word of sympathy. They were rats on a sinking ship, and they knew she was the first to be thrown overboard. Her reign, built on borrowed power and intimidation, had evaporated overnight. The second thread was Julian. His title, creative director, remained, but its meaning was hollowed out. Mr. Chen, in his capacity as interim chairman, had immediately instituted a company-wide budget freeze. All projects, including Julian's pet ventures, were put under review. His corporate credit card was canceled. His expense account was suspended. For the first time, he had to submit a formal request with a detailed cost-benefit analysis simply to order new art supplies. He was no longer the visionary founder. He was a middle manager in a company that was suddenly ruthlessly focused on profitability. He was being taught the lesson his father and I had learned decades ago: ambition without discipline is just a path to bankruptcy. The unraveling quickly spread from their professional lives to their personal one. The lifestyle they had built was a facade funded by my investment and their projected future earnings, both of which were now gone. The first late payment notice arrived for the lease on Chloe's luxury SUV. Then came the call from the country club politely informing them that their membership was suspended pending payment of their overdue account. Their circle of friends, the sycophants, and social climbers who had orbited them vanished. The calls stopped. The invitations to galas and exclusive dinners dried up. I watched all of this from a distance through the detailed daily reports provided by Mr. Chen. I felt no joy, no sense of victory. This was not a game. It was a salvage operation. The audit was revealing the true extent of their mismanagement. They had been hemorrhaging money, spending lavishly on non-essential luxuries, a private chef for client lunches, first-class flights for conferences. They barely attended a branding retreat in the Caribbean that was little more than a vacation. My intervention hadn't been an act of revenge. It had been a necessary amputation to save the business from certain death. The final unraveling, the one that truly mattered, happened between them. Stripped of their wealth, their status, and their social armor, they had nothing left but each other, and it turned out that wasn't nearly enough. Their arguments became a constant corrosive presence in the house they would soon have to sell. Chloe could not look at Julian without seeing a failure, a weakling who had lost their kingdom. Julian could not look at Chloe without seeing the architect of their downfall, the serpent who had whispered poison into his ear. The breaking point, as David Chen later recounted to me, was over a piece of jewelry. Chloe wanted to sell a diamond necklace, a gift from Julian in their early heady days, to cover their mounting legal bills. Julian, in a moment of clarity, realized the truth. "You don't care about the company, do you?" he had said to her, his voice devoid of its usual weakness. "You never did. You just cared about the money, the parties, the clothes." "Of course I cared about the money," she had screamed back. "What else is there?" "Did you think I fell in love with your brilliant, tortured artist soul? I fell in love with your potential, with the life you were supposed to give me, and you let your mother take it all away." That was it. The final mask had fallen. It was the moment Julian finally understood that Chloe had never loved him. She had only loved the version of him that I had created and funded. His ambition had been a proxy for her greed. 2 days later, Chloe was gone. She packed her bags, took whatever was left in their joint account, and left a short, cruel note on the kitchen counter. She had disappeared from his life as quickly and completely as she had entered it. Her purpose, now that the money was gone, had been served. That evening, I received a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. It was from David. "She's on a plane to Dubai," it read. "She won't be coming back. I'm sorry for all the trouble she caused Evelyn." I typed back a simple reply. She was a symptom, David, not the disease. The true disease was a lack of character, a void where responsibility should have been. And now my son, stripped of everything, his wife, his company, his wealth, his pride, was finally alone with it. The unraveling was complete. Now the question was, what if anything could be rebuilt from the ruins? Do you believe that true character is revealed only after a person has lost everything? Or is it present all along, simply waiting to be tested? Ruin has a sound. It is not the crashing of a building or the wailing of sirens. It is the profound humming silence of a life that has been hollowed out. For a month after Chloe's departure, that was the only sound in Julian's world. He lived in the echo chamber of his own failure, a ghost in a house that was no longer his, surrounded by furniture bearing the invisible tags of impending repossession. From my vantage point, I observed this silence. Mr. Chen's reports became less about corporate maneuvers and more about the quiet, slow-motion collapse of my son's life. The luxury SUV was repossessed. The official eviction notice was served. He sold what little he had of value watches, cufflinks, electronics for a fraction of their worth, not for a grand escape, but for groceries. He was adrift, stripped of the two things that had defined him, Chloe's ambition and my money. I waited. This was a necessary crucible. Before anything could be rebuilt, the site had to be completely cleared of debris. I had torn down the condemned structure. Now it was up to him to see if the foundation was still sound. The first sign of life, the first indication that something other than despair might grow in the ruins, came in the form of a small, almost insignificant action. Julian, the visionary founder of J Creative, the man who had once sneered at a five-star hotel for having the wrong brand of champagne, took a job. He didn't use his connections or his tarnished family name. He answered an online ad. He became a junior graphic designer for a small, unglamorous marketing firm in a nondescript office park on the other side of town. He worked for a salary that was less than his former monthly car payment. He worked in a cubicle under fluorescent lights for a boss half his age. He took his lunch in a brown paper bag. It was an act of profound humility, a quiet acknowledgement that he had to start again, not from the middle, not even from the beginning, but from a position of debt, both financial and moral. When Mr. Chen informed me, I felt no pity and no pride. I simply registered it as a data point. The patient was showing a faint pulse. It was a start. 2 more months passed, 2 months of silence. Then one Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was him. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello, Julian." His voice was different. The arrogance was gone, the desperation was gone. In their place was a quiet, weary gravity. "Hi, Mom," he said. The word mom sounded foreign, rusty from disuse. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for help. He didn't make excuses. "I wanted to let you know," he began. "I got my first full paycheck last week. I used it to set up a payment plan with 2 of the small suppliers from the old company, the ones we never paid, the printer and the freelance photographer. It's not much, only $100 a month to each, but I told them I wouldn't miss a payment." I was silent, allowing his words to settle. This was more than a data point. This was an action. This was character. And he continued, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer suppress. "I'm sorry, not for the company, not for the money. I'm sorry for who I was, for believing that your love was something to be spent, for letting you down. I let you down, Mom." This was the apology I had never asked, for the one I had never expected to receive. It was not a plea for forgiveness, but a simple statement of fact. It was an acknowledgement of the truth. "That is a responsible action, Julian." I said, my voice even. I would not offer absolution. He had to find that for himself. Taking responsibility is the first and most important step. "I know," he said. "I'm still figuring out the rest." We ended the call. I sat in my library for a long time, the chessboard in front of me set up exactly as it was the day the APS workers came. The game had been won long ago, but I had left the pieces on the board. Now I knew why. The game wasn't over. Protocol Storm was never just about destruction. It had a final secret phase. Phase 8, the reconstruction. The following week, I summoned Julian to the J Creative office. He arrived on time, dressed not in a designer suit, but in clean, simple trousers and a button-down shirt. He looked thinner, but his eyes were clear. The office he entered was a different place. The ostentatious art was gone, replaced by whiteboards covered in sales figures and market analysis. The staff was smaller, more focused. He was met at reception by the new CEO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Eleanor Vance, whom I had hired for her reputation as a brilliant turnaround specialist. She led him to the main conference room. I was already there with Mr. Chen. We gestured for him to sit. There was no small talk. I slid a slim portfolio across the table to him. "The audit of J Creative is complete." I began, my voice all business. The company is now stable and has a clear path to profitability. We are launching a new internal division. It's called J-Origin. Its mission is to focus on pure, unbranded creative work, developing new talent and new ideas away from the pressures of the main brand. It will be a design incubator. I paused, meeting his gaze. J-Origin needs a lead mentor, not an executive, not a director, a mentor. The job is to guide the young designers, to teach them, to help them turn their raw talent into marketable skills. The pay is modest. The hours will be long. You will have no budget authority, no hiring power, and no expense account. You will report directly to Miss Vance, but you will have a desk, a computer, and the chance to do the one thing you were always truly good at: create. I leaned back. The position is yours if you want it. He stared at the portfolio, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. He saw the simple one-page job description. He saw the salary, a fraction of his former one. He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw the son. I remembered the boy who used to spend hours sketching in his notebook, the boy who loved to build things. There were tears welling in his eyes, but they were not tears of shame or regret. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. "Yes," he whispered, his voice choked. "Thank you, yes." My work was done. I had not destroyed my son. I had dismantled a dangerous, entitled illusion that was masquerading as my son. I had forced him to disappear so that the man he was meant to be could finally emerge. Chloe wanted me to vanish from their lives. Instead, I had become the foundation of their new one, a foundation built not on entitlement, but on earned respect. My legacy would not be the money I left behind, but the character I was able to salvage from the wreckage. The greatest gift I could give my son was not a safety net, but a clean slate, a chance to build a life, however small, that was truly his own. That evening I returned to my library. The chessboard sat exactly where I had left it, the pieces frozen in their final positions from a game won weeks ago. I walked over to it, my fingers tracing the cool, polished wood of my white queen. For a long moment I studied the board not as a victor gloating over a vanquished foe, but as an architect reviewing a finished design. With a quiet, deliberate movement, I reached across the board and gently laid the black king on its side. It is the traditional gesture of concession, the silent, dignified end to a long and brutal game. The board was now clear. A new game with new rules could now begin. Is a second chance something that can be given, or is it something that must be earned, piece by painful piece?